Hello, my name is Danielle Whitehead, and I will be presenting on adult development and the forgotten language of children. The chapter that I've chosen is chapter 4. It is titled In the Kitchen. So, in the kitchen, it begins with this quote, and it says, "Our method, like apprenticeship, was to show a little technique. Then let the children do it their way, put their own ideas into practice, and make their own mistakes." So there is a story, or one of the then children shares her experience where this particular time, the director of the little camp allowed the children to um, be in the kitchen, come up with ideas for lunch or dinner, whatever it may have been. In this particular story, it was lunch. And Miss Firestone's daughter, Risa, was in charge on this day. And she had everything planned out from A to B to Z. And they went to the store and they forgot the lettuce. And in the chapter, Risa recalls her experience with forgetting the lettuce and being in control on that day, and she was 11 at the time. So she had forgotten it, and she asked her mom to go get the lettuce. Well, mom had to let Peggy know who was in charge, and Peggy said that it was better if nobody went to get the lettuce. Of course, Risa just thought, no lettuce. Like, how do you have meatloaf without salad? How do you not have salad for lunch? This is just going to read a little bit of what she said. "I fully believed that the meatloaf would look ridiculous alone and that the lunch, for which I was responsible, would be ruined. I found it terribly painful at the time, but Peggy was right. She helped me to see I had to take responsibility for my actions. I had been so proud of myself for having planned and shopped for the whole meal. But she made me confront the fact that I had forgotten something. I wasn't such a big shot after all. I made a mistake. And I wasn't allowed to hide the results or recast them as perfectly as my ego required." So, reading this chapter, it made me kind of think of how we learn from our experiences, basically, what we go through. Because a lot of the times, I would say as adults, we can be presented with situations that we don't really know what to do in that moment. So it's just a situation that we have to learn from. It's experience that we have to learn from. So, and I'll read her because Risa did give a comment later on, being an adult, of how that experience affected her later on in life. But I'll read that later on. Reading this chapter, it just made me think about how we have to learn from our experiences, and not all learning comes out of a book, or not all learning is learned behavior. Sometimes we don't have the answer in that moment, and we have to reflect later on, and from there be able to analyze the situation, analyze or think about, determine how we could have done it differently, and how in the future, how to present ourselves or how to behave in the future when faced with a situation like that before. But initially, when we're faced with certain experiences, we don't know what to do. So I decided to use the experiential learning theory as my theoretical perspective. This theory was published by David A. Kolb in 1984, and of course, it was developed from his learning style inventory. So Kolb proposes that the experiential learning theory has six main characteristics. One, learning is best conceived as a process, not in terms of outcomes. Two, learning is a continuous process grounded in experience. Three, learning requires the resolution of conflicts between dialectically opposed modes of adaptation to the world. Learning is, by its very nature, full attention. Four, learning is a holistic process of adaptation to the world. Learning involves transactions between the person and environment. That's five. And six, learning is the process of creating knowledge that is the result of the transaction between social knowledge and personal knowledge. So Kolb's learning theory, again, is a holistic perspective that combines experience, perception, cognition, and behavior into two levels, a four-stage cycle of learning and four separate learning styles. Kolb's model differs from others because it offers both a way to understand individual learning styles and gives an explanation of a style of experiential learning that applies to all learners. We're going to start with the four stages of experiential learning. So the first stage is concrete experience. This is a new experience of a situation that is encountered, or there is a reinterpretation of existing experience. So whether it's an experience that one has never experienced or it's the experience that one has experienced before, this is just like I was saying, maybe because, life, we do get presented with some situations over and over and over again. And until we master how to go about the situation, sometimes we find ourselves in the same situations over and over again. So the concrete experience is either a new situation or a new experience or experience that we've been in before and basically are given another run at. So the concrete experience is basically the act of learning through doing. In order to be successful, the learner must be able to approach the experience in an open manner. This means that the learner must be able to adapt as well, rather than to take a systematic approach to the experience. During this stage, the learner is actively experiencing an activity or an event. This is also known as the do stage. Next, reflective observation. Learner reflects back on the experience, reflects on any inconsistencies between experience and understanding, and observes from different perspectives. So this is where, let's just say, a situation where completely left. And so now you're home and you're trying to make sense of it all. So you're running the experience through your head, and obviously there's some disconnect between what happened and your understanding of whatever it may be. There's a little disconnect. So typically, or I'll say sometimes, a person may be able to look at it. Let's say it involves other people. Look at it from another person or the other person's perspective, or even if it doesn't involve other people, just try to see it from different angles outside of what you believe and what you understand, and because obviously there's some disconnect. So reflective observation is the act of learning through observation and reflection. The learner consciously reflects back on the experience. The learner reflects, observes, and critically examines their experiences or experience from all perspectives. This stage is simply also known as the observed stage. The abstract conceptualization. This stage is where reflection gives rise to a new idea or a modification of an existing abstract concept the learner has learned from their experience. This is known as a think stage. So the learner attempts to conceptualize a theory or a model of what has been observed. The learner uses logic and ideas as opposed to feelings to understand the situation and problems. And then the final stage or stage of the cycle, active experimentation. The learner applies their idea or ideals to the world around them, to see what happens. So this is where the final stage is where you've sat down, you reflected on everything, and so then you try to come up with possible solutions, basically, and put the solutions to the test. So this is called the plan stage. This is a stage where learners plan to test out their theory or plan for a similar future experience. It's applying the knowledge gained from the experience through the other learning abilities for use in experimentation. The learner uses the theories to solve problems and make decisions. So basically, the learner begins by having an experience. The learner reflects on the experience from different perspectives. The learner then draws conclusions and relates them to theories and concepts that lead to experimentation and action. So you have all four of those, the cycle, four of those stages. The learner begins by having the experience, which is concrete. The learner reflects, reflective observation. The learner then draws conclusions and relates them to theories and concepts. That's the abstract. And then it leads to experimentation, active experimentation. Okay, next I have a video for you guys. So let me stop sharing this. Or well, let me share.
Arguably, the most natural and powerful form of learning is through experience, or more precisely, through reflection on doing. Also called experiential learning, it's what prima ballerinas do after their performance at the National Opera. But it also happens to boys that are sad because their father got angry when they played football in the living room. By the age of 1, we all had our own painful encounter with experiential learning when we tried to walk, failed, fell, and cried like, well, a baby. And even though this was an unpleasant and discouraging exercise that lasted for months, in the end, we all made it. How is that possible? As soon as we fell and the first shock was over, our brain unconsciously began to make sense out of all the information available to identify how this embarrassment occurred. It remembers that when we pushed ourselves up, everything was fine. Our feet on the floor, our arms in position, and our head and shoulders upright, ready to go. When our upper leg muscles pulled our left foot 12.3% to the front at an angle of 23 degrees, our arms didn't complement the movement, and the ventricles in the inner ear responsible for static balance, got confused for a second. When at the same moment the cat ran by, our eyes sent an alarming signal to the hippocampus and we completely lost it. Ouch. Unconsciously, this is how our brain analyzes the relationship of events within our body or in the environment. It happens all the time as we learn to walk, talk, kiss, function in a fancy office, or dance the salsa. Once we understand the connections between what went wrong, we know what we need to change when we try the next time. Experiential learning can also be used explicitly to learn a new skill or to become better at what we already love doing. Here is how it works. First, get yourself into a situation to experience. After, reflect on what happened. Then, try to understand the relationships to form an abstract concept. If I do A, I get B. Last, decide what to do differently next time. Then do it again. Experiential learning is also believed to be responsible for the fact that musicians generally fare better at most tests, regardless of what they measure. People that practice an instrument not only engage their brain in motor, visual and auditory areas, but they also learn by reflecting on what they're doing with a fast feedback loop. A wrong tone on the violin sounds too terrible to remain unnoticed. While playing, they therefore not only learn to make music, but also that progress in general comes through practice, reflection, understanding, and repetition. You can use it with your friends or colleagues when working on a project. Silicon Valley startups do it when they tell their developers to get out of the building. After the interaction with real potential customers, the team gets together, analyzes the feedback, and decides what to do next. Tell us, what do you think? Is learning through reflecting on doing only good when acquiring new hands-on skills? Or is it also suitable to study science, math, the humanities, or abstract art?
Get online for less and get happy with HostGator.
Arguably,
Okay. Okay. One thing I loved about that video, because it definitely spoke to what I believe. I believe that experiential learning happens as a child, it happens as a teenager, it happens as an adult. Everybody at any age goes through any type of experience where we don't know what to do. And so from that situation we can grow and learn and be prepared in case we're faced with that situation, or even faced with something similar, or something that requires possibly the same response. It doesn't matter if you're a child, just like this book, and it doesn't matter if you're an adult. Everybody at some point in time, many times, learns from many experiences that they go through. Go through. Now, depending on the person, they may not, like I stated before, they may not grasp, the possible solution, or we're faced with certain situations more than once because we just have not been able to yet tackle whatever it is that I guess needs to be learned for us to overcome that situation. And so we go through the situations over and over again. So that's why I believe this cycle I think is very, very much so true as to how we go through life and learning from experiences. Some experiences, don't require a lot of thinking. You can go through experience and you can just easily be like, oh, I should have done this differently. Ta-da, you got the answer. But some situations, you really have to sit down, you really have to reflect on different things. And I think the forgotten letters, to me, I immediately like believed that the experiential learning cycle will work for that or speaks to that, because I'm kind of I'm similar, Teresa. I plan things and I like for things to go a certain way, and they don't. As an adult now that I know that now, you can't really, well, I can do that, but the expectation for things to, I guess the expectation for a mistake is, I don't expect there to be a mistake, but if there is a mistake, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. It's just, it happened. You learn from it if it's a learning experience, or if it was just a mistake that I cannot fix. Such is life. But just her being a child and her, planning this lunch, and for just one thing to go wrong, and I can just imagine that she's having a meltdown, but at the end she realized that it wasn't that big of a deal, you know. Um, this is where I'll read her later comment as she became older. She says that missing lettuce stood me in a very good stead in my life, even through medical school and a demanding internship. There were many mistakes, much larger ones, which I was able to acknowledge and live with without hiding the results. I could accept criticism without undue hurt or giving up. My performance wasn't always perfect. I needed to see that and go on just the same. So for her, it was a learning experience. It can be something as simple as forgetting lettuce, but it definitely allowed her to see that, things aren't always perfect. And it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. You go on just the same. A mistake was made. Such is life. And I mean, the missing lettuce obviously helped her go through med school and her internship. And she's able to accept criticism and go on without giving up. So while the lettuce is a very small thing, that situation had a really big impact on her. And it was all because it was something that she experienced. And from that, even at 11 years old, she was able to gain something from that experience and apply it in other areas of her life. Moving on, the learning styles of the experiential theory. So Cole views learning as an integrated process, with each stage being mutually supportive of and feeding into the next. It is possible for someone to enter the stage at any stage, enter the cycle at any stage, and follow it through the sequence. Now, this does not mean that the process will be effective for everyone. Effective learning only happens when a learner can execute all 4 stages of the model. No one stage of the cycle is effective as a learning procedure on its own. So the learning stages are based on, of course, the 4-stage learning cycle. Kolb explains that different people naturally prefer a certain single different learning style. Learners generally prefer one of the 4 styles above the others. Various factors influence a person's preferred style, of course. Whatever influences the choice of style, the learning style preference is actually the product of 2 pairs of variables, or 2 separate choices that we make, which Kolb presented as lines of access each with conflicting modes at either end. So the east-west axis is called the processing continuum, and that's how we approach a task. The north-south axis is called the perception continuum, our emotional response and or how we think or feel about it. So Cole believed that we cannot perform both variables on a single axis at the same time. For example, think and feel. He believed that our learning style is a product of these two choice decisions. Each learning style represents a combination of two preferred styles. This 2x2 matrix is a representation of Cole's learning styles, and it also highlights the terminology for the 4 learning styles. So this is just an example, the east and west and north and south. So here you have the 4 learning styles, and of course I'm going to go into them and explain more about them. So divergers, which is diverging. This is the feelings and watching, which is the concrete and reflective observation. These are people who learn better when they are allowed to observe and collect information. So these people are able to look at things from different perspectives. They're sensitive. They prefer to watch rather than do. They gather information and use their imagination to solve problems. They're really good at viewing situations from several different viewpoints. These people prefer or perform better in situations that require brainstorming. Assimilators, watching and thinking, which is abstract conceptualization, thinking, and observation. So these people are people who learn better when presented with sound logical theories to consider. They prefer a logical approach. They require a good, clear explanation rather than a practical opportunity. They are more concrete with ideas and concepts than with people. Convergers, which are doing and thinking, so it would be active experimentation and abstract conceptualization. So these are people who learn better when provided with practical applications of concepts and theories. These are people who can solve problems and will use their learning to find solutions to practical issues. Convergers are not concerned with people and interpersonal aspects. They prefer technical tasks. Convergers can solve problems and make decisions by finding solutions to questions and problems. And then lastly, accommodators. These are people who learn better when provided with hands-on experiences. So, these are people that it says doing and feeling. So the active experimentation and concrete experience. So these people rely on intuition rather than logic. They use other people's analysis and prefer to take a practical experiential approach. They are attracted to new challenges and experiences and to carry out plans. They act on gut instinct rather than logical analysis. Out of these, I would probably have to say I'm an assimilator. I prefer the logical approach. But at the same time, I am able to view things from different perspectives. So I found myself to be in definitely not an accommodator. Um, I would say I'm in between a diverger, um, assimilator, and a converger because I am able, and I'm a social worker, so of course I was taught to enter into people's world, so I can see things from other people's perspectives. I believe that's very important when it comes to dealing with situations with other people's, seeing and viewing things from other people's perspectives, because everybody's different. And what is important to me may not be important to you, and what is important to you may not be important to me. And so it's really important to be uh, careful of how you approach other people and their situations, and even a situation with yourself. So I'm definitely able to view things from different perspectives. But when it comes to the imagination, I don't know if I use my imagination to solve problems. I definitely don't. I definitely use logic. That's why I say I'm an assimilator. Um, and with the converger, I definitely am able to find solutions to practical issues. So I'm a little of all three. So going back to um, Risa's view or comment as an adult, again, just taking that experience and being able to apply it to life. And I think it's actually really good that an 11-year-old is able to learn in that situation, because I mean, I guess it was a big deal, and I feel like as a child, the bigger deal it is, I guess, the more effect the or the outcome has on you. And being in charge that day and wanting to make sure that everything is great, but you have that one missing thing, it's a big deal. So she was able to just come out of it on the better side of it. And it was an experience that she had never been faced with before. And I'm pretty sure she went through the cycle. You know, it's the experience of being in charge, having everything planned. Something goes wrong, having to deal with it. Later on, even maybe in the situation, or even later on that night or that day, thinking about the situation, possibly somebody could have helped her out, but thinking about the situation, realizing that it wasn't that big. Everything, turned out to be just fine. And thinking about how she could have handled it differently, or realizing like, oh, I overreacted. It wasn't really, that big. The day went on. Nobody even said anything. Nothing occurred because there was no lettuce. And then taking all of that, even thinking about how she can react differently, in a situation like that where she does make a mistake, and applying it to, let's say, a few weeks later, she forgot to bring something to school. And so she took what she learned from the lettuce situation and applied it to that. Just experimenting with what she learned and applying it to another similar situation. And it appears, as it did, that that little missing lettuce situation helps her get through med school and helps her in life. which I think that happens a lot with all of us. We go through experiences, like I said, we go through experiences, and in those experiences, we don't know what to do. Sometimes we're faced with situations, we can go in situations and we can think that we got it all planned out. But then we get asked a question, or something happens that we never would have thought would happen, or never even would even think that something would happen. And we don't know what to do. But the thing about it is, it's a learning experience. I view life as a learning experience. You're always learning. You're always learning. And if you find yourself in the same situations over and over and over again, then you have not learned. You are not learning. There is something that you need to get from that experience. And so if you don't learn from the experience, you're going to find yourself in that situation. And whether you know it or not, you should be going through the cycle. And I think it takes, maybe, it depends on your maturity level, I'm going to say. It depends on your maturity level, how you go about life and how you look at it. If things don't go right. And if things don't go right, I look at it as, number one, is it something that I can fix? Is it something that I can do to change it? Is it something that I can do to prevent it? Can I learn from this? What can I learn from it? If it's something that I may possibly be faced with later on, then it's time to go through the cycle. Because whatever it is, I don't want it to happen again. If it's something that has happened and there's nothing that I can do about it, then, learn from it what you can and move forward. But I really believe that life is definitely all about learning. And when looking through the different learning perspectives, all of them, at first, all of them generally just talked about learned behavior and all these behaviors that we, should have learned, and where we would have learned them from. And it wasn't, I had a hard time with finding something that I felt like fit with this particular chapter, because where I am right now in life, I don't think that we're always ready. With every situation, we're not always ready. It's not always based on what we've learned and, what we've learned in school or what we learned at home or how we've been shaped, or it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes we don't know what to do. What we learned at home won't help us in this situation. What we learned at school or out of the books or what we taught ourselves doesn't help us in this situation. And no, it doesn't always happen. But I believe that many times we're faced with situations where we just don't know what to do. And we just got to learn from our experience. So that is why I chose experiential learning. I think that it applies to everybody. I think that this was a great example of that. I'm really glad that I came across experiential learning. And I believe that this chapter and just this comment really represents just simple learning from experiences and being able to take what we learn and apply it to other areas of our life and be successful with it. So that is all I have for you. Thank you.